When the last Studebaker rolled off the assembly line on December 20th, 1963, just 5 days before Christmas, it marked the end of an era that had defined South Bend for over a century. The closure devastated a city that had built its entire identity around automobile manufacturing, leaving 7,000 workers jobless and thousands more watching their pensions evaporate. What happened next became a textbook case of Rust Belt reinvention and American deindustrialization, but the reality is far more complicated than the success stories suggest. The story begins in 1852, when the Studebaker brothers opened a humble blacksmith shop in South Bend. That small operation grew into something extraordinary. By the turn of the century, Studebaker had become the world's largest builder of buggies and wagons. When automobiles emerged, the company pivoted successfully, becoming one of America's big four automakers alongside Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. The scale of Studebaker's operation was staggering. At its peak in 1950, the company employed 45,000 workers in South Bend alone. The massive Assembly Building 84, constructed in 1923, stood 6 stories tall with a basement and contained over 1 million square feet of manufacturing space, making it one of the largest man-made structures in northern Indiana. For generations of families, Studebaker wasn't just an employer, it was a way of life. Fathers and sons worked side by side in the plant, with entire family trees rooted in the factory floors. This industrial dominance transformed South Bend into a thriving metropolis. The city's population exploded from 36,000 in 1900 to 132,445 by 1960, making it the 92nd largest city in America. Studebaker heavily recruited Central Europeans during their mass migration to the United States, and these new Americans brought their religious beliefs, cultural traditions, and languages. South Bend became a predominantly Catholic community, home to numerous ethnic restaurants and celebrations like the Polish holiday Dingus Day. But by the 1960s, cracks were showing. High labor costs, quality concerns, and declining sales were strangling the corporation. The writing was on the wall when the Studebaker-Packard Corporation announced on December 9, 1963, just 17 days after President Kennedy's assassination, that they would close the South Bend factory. The timing could not have been worse. The last car rolled off the assembly line on December 20th, and with it, the heart of South Bend died. The closure's impact extended far beyond the immediate job losses. Thousands more workers had been laid off and were hoping to get called back. Pension promises crumbled due to severe underfunding, leaving retirees without the security they had counted on. The United Auto Workers Union seized on the Studebaker pension crisis to push for federal reform. The Studebaker pension disaster was so severe it led directly to the passage of ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, in 1974, which also created the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation to prevent similar disasters, fundamentally changing how American pensions operate. South Bend entered a devastating spiral. By 1950, more than half of all employment had been in manufacturing. By 2000, only 16% of the local economy consisted of manufacturing jobs. The population hemorrhaged, and by 2010, the city had shrunk to just 101,168 residents. If you only count the areas that were within city limits during South Bend's 1960 peak, nearly 50,000 people had vanished from those neighborhoods. The city had masked some of this decline through annexation, nearly doubling its geographic size, but the core was hollowing out. By 2011, the city's reputation had hit rock bottom. Newsweek listed South Bend among the top 10 dying cities in America. Vacant houses dotted neighborhoods like missing teeth, with roughly 14% of the city's homes sitting empty. Crime and vandalism plagued abandoned properties. The Bosch plant, which had evolved from Studebaker's former operations, announced its closure, taking another 800 jobs with it. Enter Pete Buttigieg. A young Harvard-educated Rhodes Scholar and Navy veteran, Buttigieg ran for mayor in 2011 with a radically different vision. He understood that nothing like Studebaker would ever come back, but believed the city could reimagine its future. His central insight was that South Bend needed to stop mourning its industrial past and start building a post-industrial economy. Buttigieg's signature initiative was 1,000 houses in 1,000 days, launched in February 2013. The program aimed to address about two-thirds of South Bend's vacant and abandoned houses in less than 3 years through rehabilitation or demolition. The city committed to moving fast, identifying properties that could be saved, and quickly tearing down those that could not. The results seemed impressive. By November 2015, the city had dealt with exactly 1,000 properties. 427 homes were repaired, 569 demolished, 10 deconstructed, 6 set aside for community development corporations, and 110 under contract for demolition. For the first time in decades, South Bend's population began to grow again. Core historic neighborhoods that had been losing residents for 50 years started gaining them back. Buttigieg was re-elected in 2015 with 80% of the vote. But the program sparked fierce controversy. The majority of fines and demolitions were carried out in minority neighborhoods, leading critics to accuse Buttigieg of gentrification disguised as urban renewal. Regina Williams Preston, whose family lost several investment properties they hoped to repair, channeled her anger into a successful city council run. She pushed for more resources and fewer fines for residents struggling to renovate vacant homes. The data tells a complex story. 4 years after the 1,000 Houses initiative ended, there were actually fewer occupied homes in South Bend than when Buttigieg was elected, despite rising city population. The Alice Project calculated that between 2010 and 2016, the number of households in South Bend shrank by 8%, while the number living in poverty increased to 54% by their measure. Buttigieg's poverty claims also faced scrutiny. He stated that black poverty fell by more than half on his watch, relying on data that initially supported this claim. However, newer census data available at the time invalidated his assertion. A 2017 report commissioned by the city acknowledged that communities of color face the dual burdens of a weak local economy and deep racial economic inequality. Despite these controversies, Buttigieg pursued an innovative economic development strategy. He recognized that South Bend possessed a hidden asset, an extraordinary concentration of fiber optic cables. A major data corridor traveling from New York to Chicago passed directly under the old Studebaker factory. Buttigieg explained, "We sit on one of the richest concentrations of fiber optic cable throughway in the country." This digital infrastructure became the foundation for South Bend's reinvention. The city began marketing itself as a technology hub, attracting data centers and tech companies. The Renaissance District emerged from the bones of the old Studebaker plant. Building 84, that massive assembly hall where thousands once built cars, was being transformed into what developers claimed would be the Midwest's largest mixed-use technology campus. Kevin Smith, founder and chief executive officer of Global Access Point, invested over $54 million of his own money into the project, with city, state, and federal investment adding another $14.6 million. Beneath the Renaissance District lies what is now described as the densest fiber corridor in the nation. Above it sits the largest carrier hotel and data center in the region, providing a robust backbone for IT operations. The University of Notre Dame became a crucial partner in this transformation. The prestigious institution, which had always been South Bend's other major anchor besides Studebaker, began expanding its research presence downtown. Companies like Trek 10, N-Focus, and the South Bend Code School set up operations in the old factory buildings. When Buttigieg left office in January 2020 to pursue his presidential campaign, he could point to real achievements. Population had stabilized and grown 2.3% during the 2010s, the first growth since the 1950s. Unemployment had decreased. The housing market was strengthening. His farewell address struck a triumphant tone, and now I can confidently say South Bend is back. But was it really? The answer depends on how you define recovery. Recent developments suggest reason for cautious optimism. In June 2023, General Motors and Samsung announced a $3.05 billion electric vehicle battery plant for St. Joseph County, just outside South Bend. The project represents the largest single investment in the region in 75 years and promises to create over 1,600 jobs when it opens in December 2027. Carl Baxmeyer, president of the St. Joseph County Board of Commissioners, called it a development that will impact our region for decades. The General Motors and Samsung plant sits alongside an $11 billion Amazon Web Services complex that could ultimately employ 1,000 direct and contract workers. In December 2025, Indiana Governor Mike Braun announced state support for a downtown South Bend tech and talent hub, designating it an innovation development district with up to $225 million in state investment over 30 years. The University of Notre Dame is anchoring a 202,000 square foot research and innovation hub expected to bring more than 400 high-tech jobs downtown. These investments represent a fundamental shift in South Bend's economic base, from heavy manufacturing to technology, data services, healthcare, and education. The strategy appears to be working. Housing prices increased 18.1% between June 2023 and June 2024. New building permits rose 16.4% in the first 8 months of 2024. The labor market has shown resilience, with employment growth outpacing the national average. Yet significant challenges remain. South Bend's current population of around 103,415 is still 21.9% smaller than its 1960 peak. The city has fallen from 92nd to 314th largest in the United States. The poverty rate of 21.3% remains 42.6% higher than the Indiana state average. Median household income of $55,786 sits below the national average. More than half of residents surveyed said their neighborhoods had not improved over the previous 5 years. The recovery has been deeply uneven. Some neighborhoods are experiencing wealth and growth, while others still face significant challenges. The tech sector jobs being created often require skills and education levels that do not match the displaced manufacturing workforce. There is a wide spectrum of income levels across the city, and racial economic inequality persists. Manufacturing still accounts for 10.9% of regional employment, compared to the national average of 8.4%, making the area vulnerable during economic contractions. The unemployment rate of 4.7% in 2024 was higher than both 2023 and pre-pandemic levels. Residents themselves remain divided on the recovery narrative. Sean White, a South Bend resident, said nothing has changed, and he questioned how someone could run the whole country if they cannot even get their city right first. The Studebaker legacy lingers in unexpected ways. A grove of 5,000 trees planted on the company's proving grounds in 1937, spelling out the Studebaker name, still stands and remains visible on Google Earth, a living reminder of the city's industrial past. The old factory buildings, now housing tech startups and data centers, serve as physical bridges between South Bend's manufacturing heritage and its digital future. So did South Bend really recover? The honest answer is nuanced. The city has successfully reinvented itself, moving from a vulnerable single industry economy to a more diversified base centered on education, healthcare, technology, and data services. Major investments signal confidence in the region's future. Population has stabilized after decades of decline. New industries are taking root in the shells of old factories, but recovery implies returning to a previous state of prosperity, and South Bend has not achieved that. The city remains smaller, poorer, and more unequal than it was at its peak. Many residents, particularly in communities of color, have not experienced the benefits of the new economy. The transition from manufacturing to services has created winners and losers. What South Bend has accomplished is perhaps more significant than simple recovery. It has demonstrated that Rust Belt cities can transform themselves without abandoning their identity. The Renaissance District literally builds the future on the foundation of the past. The same fiber optic corridors that once carried Studebaker's communications now carry the data that powers modern businesses. The GM and Samsung battery plant, scheduled to open in 2027, represents a potential return to large-scale manufacturing, but manufacturing transformed for the electric vehicle age. It is a reminder that industry has not disappeared from places like South Bend. It has evolved. 60 years after that last Studebaker rolled off the assembly line, South Bend stands at another crossroads. The city has proven it can survive the death of its signature industry and begin building something new. Whether that translates into broadly shared prosperity for all residents remains an open question. The story of South Bend is ultimately the story of American deindustrialization and the struggle to build something meaningful from the ruins. It is a story that is still being written, one fiber optic cable and one battery plant at a time. The city may not have fully recovered, but it has undeniably endured, and in doing so, it offers both hope and hard-earned wisdom for other communities facing similar transitions. As South Bend looks toward its next chapter, the lessons are clear. Recovery is not about returning to the past, but about having the courage to reimagine the future. Whether that reimagining will benefit everyone who calls the city home. That is the real test of South Bend's comeback story.